for illumined life to be birthed into form. I am the truth. I am the light. Illumined, beloved divine.
So hello there everyone, and welcome to this video with me here today. In this dispensation and dissemination of, as you can see, waves and cycles of Illumined Union, we're going to go deeper into the creation aspect, or a bigger perspective of what we're really healing through the sacredness of Illumined Union and what it truly is. We've talked about it a bit, maybe perhaps more from the relationship or relating experience and mirroring of polarities, and how we're healing those patterns, because this is still a core issue at this fundamental time. It always has been. And many people who are not getting it, and they're living, as we've talked about before, right, in this surface level of not yet being awoke to what this sacred journey back home is and healing the core wound of separation. I would advise to read Amora Kuan-Yin's book, the Pleiadian Tantric Workbook, because it has this beautiful creation story. And it also presents these polarities and splitting apart and coming back together, and how in many different ways this can play out. And yet it's at the creation, at the root level, it's always the same thing. It's always about returning to the core of our creation principles and how we as individual being of illumined design were created. So recently someone said to me, well, I know there's illumined partnerships existing already on Earth, and I would like to reframe here and talk about what Spirit showed me. Spirit said there are no illumined partnerships on Earth at this time, because being in a spiritual union or being in a devotional union with someone, you know, we have a lot of these spiritual partnerships that we might meet or we know about, and they present as this ideal, and yet this is not what Spirit talks about as illumined union. This is not yet the Christ partnership. This is the sacredness of the inner Christ field embodiment, this inner illumined self that we first have to work on ourselves. We have to become and fully embody ourselves, but not only through the journey of light, which many of these spiritual beings are pursuing on Earth at this time. This is a deep journey through transgression and darkness and the fallen principles of Luciferian fall we're going to talk about and address here today. And you'll be able to see how this also plays out in relationships, because the less you're aware of this, the more relationships you're actually going to be presented with in this earth realm. Perhaps one very difficult partnership, or many of more challenging partnerships. If you're not yet being challenged in your partnerships, you're perhaps not yet awake to the true principle of what sacred journey back home through Illumined Union is, the road back to the sacredness of the mother's heart, and how you were yourself also created from the beginning of, you know, before time ever existed. And the other version is that maybe this is not your path in this lifetime. So it's either this or that. But everyone starts somewhere, and everyone is ultimately, eventually, you know, journeying back home. Every soul of the, you know, expression of polarity that began once as this experiment. And we're going to talk about the fall and what the fall recreated in a different version, and how it created this separation and fragmentation, that through these relationship experiences we're trying to pick up these pieces and engulf them and sort of digest them as they are our own, because this is the only way back home. You have a lot of spiritual unions on this planet, and these devotional partnerships that people know as, you know, let's say two beings who are more advanced in their spiritual pursuits and understanding, and they seem to be having very pure relationships in how they relate to each other in the world or being of service. Not necessarily that means they're walking the path of Illumined Union. This is the path that goes very deep into darkness and the dark aspects of creation. And those of you who have had these difficult journeys and healing through a lot of transgressions, you exactly know what I'm talking about. So we're going to begin at the beginning through the fallen principle and what it truly means and what it created. And then we're going to move more into how this dynamic is still being played out in our relationships, and some of the things perhaps for you to understand and take upon as you're walking your own journey. So I'm trying to hold my hands like this so I wouldn't wave too much, because I like to do that. As you know, I get so much into the core principle. So first thing first, right? This separation that began, and it began with one thought, which we've already talked about here before. This thought of, what if I'm not God? What if I myself can be more than God is? which brought about this Lucifer rebellion and agenda, which brought this separation and division of souls. It's almost like there was a creation of clans. And this brought forth through eons of time of moving deeper into creation and the creation of many difficult physical realm experiences that weren't forced, that weren't first foreseen by that one which we know as God, the principle of all life, where all life comes from, the beautiful creator, creatrix, and the mother-father aspect of it, of course. This began differently. This began as through one of God's creations that we know as Lucifera. And she is not a he, it's not a Lucifer. This is a myth in many of the different stories. And these stories also always come to the point of knowing Lucifer as the star. And many times, it's referenced as Venus, the shining one. And how the cycles of Venus on earth also relate to healing of these different transgressions, cycles of shadow and light. And many shamanic astrologers talk about this journey of this polarity interchanging as well. However, Lucifera is the original creation design name of that being who was once she, a creation angel. I see her as Aurea's sister. And Aurea is my spirit Elohim mother. She knows her well. And when I'm in Aurea's presence, I actually have this deep longing for Lucifera's presence back home. And although she has been a very maleficent presence in my own life, as I've shared with you, trying to create all sorts of havoc and suffering in my life, I've been feeling how much she wants us to hate, to come into the frequency of hate. So with everything I've gone through and all these designs of transgression that exist as a part of this fragmented collective that actually acts as all these instigative forces as one, from all the different levels, right? The Christ is being hated and attacked because she hates the Christ, right? And the Christ is the firstborn within all of us, which even a creation angel begins with. It's the origin of your own creation, but there's also an individuality within it. So through Lucifer's fall, she wanted to bypass that which we call divine will, and she wanted to be her own maker of this universe. She wanted to basically recreate the universe by trying to bring everything back to the null point. She tried to annihilate life and basically bring all of these unions back into the notion of, like basically the beginning where that did not even happen. So she would know herself as above and beyond what we know God. But that can't happen because she herself originates from the Godhead, as we all do. And as deficient as, as weird and as difficult, very like one giant anomaly, right? As complex as this thought that began all this transgression, all this darkness traveling through, the creation, and then the traveling through these different realms of creation and density and difficulty of matter, and all this that we're experiencing: war, hate, greed, lust, all these patterns, envy, right? All these distortions. They're not just Christian beliefs; they're actually reality that was created through her distorted design and her distorted perception of herself as a creation being. Somehow, by fragmenting herself, she also fragmented herself and her life force and her creations to the extent that, in a way, she no longer knows herself at her primordial creation core essence. So she doesn't know herself in the Illumined Union aspect. So when I talk about, where spirit through me talks about Illumined Union, we're actually talking about that aspect that when we're coming into the union of the fullness of self, illumined self, Christ core self, we're actually not just here to experience beautiful, blissful partnerships, but we're actually here healing that first Luciferian fall. And we're each doing that as we're moving into these waves of Illumined Union, which means this union is happening on this planet per cycles. A lot of people have this false tendency and belief, which I also once was incepted with, but I'm seeing things very differently now. We're talking about how we're here to heal the earth and heal the planet. And, maybe beings, a lot of them feel they have this mission and calling. I don't. Particularly what I feel is, there's so many planets and stations of life in this multiverse. And planets basically serve to provide a training ground, but it always has been about us. It has always been about these creator-like aspects within us that are trying to remember ourselves before the fall, during the fall, and then after the fall, which is kind of like our futuristic self that already has integrated this fall and is beyond the veil, which is what illumined beings are. And therefore we're coming on earth to assist those who are still not seeing behind this veil, and they're seeing that this reality is all there is, and they're being fed all these different belief systems about this reality, which might feel true and resonate at a particular time, but the more you will wake up, the more you will see there's much more in depth. There's a bigger version of this story, and it's so complex, and it's not something someone can tell you as a story like I'm telling you here, and you go like, okay, that's the truth, but then you still go back to your life living it in your own regular way and set belief systems. This is something that can only shake you up from within, from your core. And I've had this experience with Lucifera's presence in my own life, and I've realized just how much she's been torturing me for me to have that feeling of hate. And I don't, because by swelling up in my heart, especially recently when this next wave of Illumined Union began, because like I said, it's intense when it's happening. So the mother pushes out these streams of life force to our hearts that we're gradually assimilating. This is happening, the integration is happening, these waves, right, through these cycles. And now this cycle is very intense as I'm feeling it, so things are accelerated in the way they're happening and the way sometimes partnerships are reflecting us, because what we're doing is we're still needing to heal the inner child, the most deficient, needy part of us, the part of the human experience that has been so deprived and tortured in this lifetime that it feels it's an absolute disconnect from the mother, from the womb of life. And many beings have a tendency to be avoidant in their real life just because when they wake up to this notion of how much there's hurt and pain there, so much of it will still come out, because true awakening is through pain, because that pain is in emotional pain bodies and mental bodies of many beings, most human beings, to different level of extent, because we're at different levels of assimilation here, and you cannot compare your experience with anyone else's. But a lot of people, as I'm seeing and witnessing this realm, are trying to bypass this true core healing that we're here to do. When you remember who we really are and what took place as that fall, it's kind of going back home, but through integrating every single inception, distorted frequency of that which is source frequency within us and that which is our core design. For me, that is the Aurea, Aura and presence within me, which I get to live and experience. And I've talked about how accepting yourself is just the first step on this journey. Then you have to feel yourself, and at the third level you have to experience yourself, because let me tell you, only once you really experience yourself, you are on the road to Illumined Union. Because when I'm in Aurea's embodiment, each time I integrate more of my inner child wounds, the human child wounds, I get to be more of Aurea. She enters me more deeply, and that's the only way for me to integrate the spirit, is to embody that spirit and becoming more Christened in my embodiment. My heart swelling up with love, and that love shattering all shackles around that heart, all veils and distortions which have been basically embedded within us through this fallen frequency. And even though we're on earth, we're feeling it's about earth, but earth is just a mirror of that polarity for us to see that it always has been about us. It's nothing else but you and your soul and your commitment to the path of your soul union. And realizing first is the painful part, that you have many, many barriers that lie around your heart and your mind. And that all of your lower four bodies, right? Physical, emotional, mental, and you might even say your astral body, all these bodies have been deeply incepted for every single human. And the reason why most people, because they have this tendency to live a very mundane life day to day, and they don't have much time for inner work, because let me tell you, I've had all the time in the world and still I'm doing it. It's so profound. It requires a lot of space in your life, a lot of clearing of that which is unnecessary and trivial and not important. Because once you get it, that shake-up happens within you, not someone tells you and you just go back to your status quo life. Only when a shake-up happens, that's the tower moment, you will realize that you owe it to creation, that is your responsibility. And each one will get that cue on their own. And when that happens, you will realize how much pain is still trapped in the pain body. So we've built these holes in our lower four bodies that have become embedded with pain, and this pain is now exiting our bodies. And a lot of us who've been transgressed are feeling this now more amplified than people who have not been that much tortured, because every Christ being is very much tortured in a way, because that's just Lucifera's way. She really cannot stand the Christ and embodiment, because she basically claims this planet as her own, as her station, as her creation, and yet it's not. She's trying to recreate a specific condition and environment that would serve the control that she embodies. So ever since she decided to fall and become her own maker in this universe. That's why there's a belief that we call God the universe, which God is not. God is above and beyond even what we call the universe, physically and spiritually speaking. And so her plan is to have everything under complete and total control, which you can now notice on our planet and what's happening with all these agendas and steadfast movement towards a bionic, transgressed, transhuman, right? Anything that we would not truly understand ourselves as organic beings of divine love. And because this is such a difficult journey, is people who are very much still trapped in their mental bodies, this is what she also does, that's a part of her creation, is these people have more difficulty in understanding how to actually heal. They think they're healing it because they're having an understanding. Let's say they would watch a video, even now you're watching my video, you say, oh, I resonate with that, I understand, and you're kind of in compliance and you think, well, that's healing, right? That's just a very tiny, tiny amount of what's actually needing to take place for you to actually heal. Because there's levels of pain trapped in all of our bodies that we're really needing to access and address, and only through that integration happens. So each time you would go deeper into union is when we actually have these human heartbreaks. So every now, here and there will have to be someone who comes along our path into our life who will break our heart, and we're going to be all in and all out there. So for me, that path has been almost unanimous with the expression of how I live. For example, no matter how many times I was torn apart and, betrayed or whatever, these are just words. That in truth, it doesn't exist. It's just unveiling and exposing more of what is the truth. Every time I opened my heart actually more. So even if the conditions were similar, I still went all in. And that's the only way for you to heal, that every time you will go all in like the fool. The fool has to go all in. A lot of people are trying to assess things. They're trying to strategize, because they're afraid of getting their hearts broken. They're afraid of getting out there. They're afraid of being hurt. So they would rather stay stuck with what is normal, right? And what is the routine and the status quo, except really moving out there. And that's a person who's still not awake to the truth of what's happening. They might have a spiritual understanding because they consider themselves to be a spiritual person. And we discussed this before. Being spiritual or pursuing spiritual things or watching spiritually based videos has nothing to do with you absolutely waking up to the nature of the Christ and the fall and what that is and how it's playing out in creation. So when you have that awakening and epiphany and understanding, you realize that's what you're here to do. That becomes your only devotion. And that selfless service you're performing at the first level that you're doing is what you're doing as your inner union cultivation and growth. So if it's a person that enters your life, or several of them, and usually it's connected with these cycles, and we each experience them differently. We travel through these waves of union when we're ready. So hardly we can talk about the collective is going through this or through that. At the creation level, yes, the creation is moving at the collective level, but within the collective there's fragments of fragments that we're each accessing individually in a way that's also separate, and it's individual, because there's an individual journey that you can't, I don't know how to explain this, but it's almost like I can't give my information and all that I've already absorbed on my journey to someone. I can't pass my suitcase of knowledge that has turned into wisdom to someone who hasn't even done the first few steps, for example. So this is what I already explained, the problem in most twin flame communities, because there's always a waiting for someone who's supposed to be your person, and you're waiting for them to kind of match you, but in a way you're already getting ahead of yourself and you're already advancing forward. And this waiting sometimes happens from the soul level because certain souls have that kind of vow. But from the perspective of Illumined Union, once you really get what this is about, there's no waiting. There's just constant progress, because what you're doing is through unveiling these Luciferian designs of control, oppression, and fear that is so deeply instilled. A lot of people say there's these lazy souls who don't do the work. That's just 50% of why they're not doing it, and they're too afraid to step on this path. They get avoidant, they don't want to go into it, and the relationship comes that will challenge them, but they would rather stay fixed with where they are because it's comfy and it's cozy, and they haven't had the tower moment yet. They don't know what this earth is really about, right? So they're just saying, well, it will happen eventually. No, God communion does not happen like this. Eventually there will be something created, even through, God is more powerful than anything, even that fallen nature, because it's the creator of all life. But everyone will have to have that awakening first before you even begin that journey. There might be a memory and affinity towards something, like people who strongly resonate with this tantric beloved path, but they are always finding themselves blocked from it, never making that first step. It's because there's still a lot of inner shadow that they haven't even started facing yet. That's just a fact of the matter. But people who are, you're starting to slowly remember and awaken to the fact that every single time you go into a deeper cycle of union, you're growing in your love. Love as a human grows within you. Love grows you as a human. And what happens is, each time, this is what Spirit has shown me, this process within myself, when my heart swells up with more love, which means that I'm not afraid to get out there. There's a risk here, and souls who are not taking a risk to go all out with their energy, even when they're going to be backed up, through opposition, and someone like doing a reversal upon you, and they're going to block you or reject you or say no, and still that love will return to you because you've seen that reflection in the mirror of the other. Now you know a greater portion of how much and how deeply you can love. Then you have the affinity to bring that love back to you, let it grow you, let it cultivate within you. And then you're going to see when another cycle or something of dark transgression, well, it's also aggressive, when it comes, you're going to have a deeper affinity to absorb it. And I call this the absorption of Lucifera. So it's like God has shown me there's fragments of her, and those beings who have proudly and very much with courage chosen this path, we're all digesting these fragmented pieces she's created. They're not necessarily our creations. For me, I know that for sure, because Aurea, she's never taken or has been a part of the fall. But because we're all one being, remember that. We're not nonchalant here. We're not detached from the whole creation story. We're all having to bear that cross that one being, as a part of the all beings, has chosen. Right? So let me give you one example. There would be 7 creation beings, first creation aspects, to go out and move their mastery of life force and put it out there, so the creation will come into different physical manifestations, well, different levels of what we know material aspect to be. Like here is very material, right? Physical, it's not the right word. And still, right, that was the first design. And imagine out of those 7, one going off and choosing to not participate in this divine will and the expression of divine love through these counterpart twin polarities, these divine couplings. And even though it's one, you don't say, well, that's just one off. Well, there's still 6 of us left. No, because there was initially 7. There always has to be the return of that template that has begun life, has put life into motion. So as the cycle unfolded for us on Earth, it feels like eons and eons of time. From the greater creation perspective, that's not the same in duration as we know it. Time is an elusive term there from that broadened perspective. But many beings, all these beings that have been sprung out from those non-fallen aspects, they've been in service this entire time, creating their own aspects and souls that through the journey of these souls, they would eventually wake up to what this union is, experience it on themselves, on their own, and then experience it as the mirror of the other and have that enjoined partnership, so that we would come to that divine law that creates, which is a trinity. Because through that polarity, you get to create a trinity. So what Lucifera wanted to do through her design and her inception was she wanted to bring life back into singularity, so that from that singularity she would have the power and control to continue life in her own design, like what she wanted life to be. Because she couldn't go back to singularity, which was in a major example what Jesus Christ did on this planet, and his light, not just what he did on planet Earth, but for all souls and for all of creation, what he did, what was a big and huge part of his mission, was to uphold that and give the affinity of this deathless nature to these souls, so it wouldn't recycle back and go back to a null point, right? This point of singularity. Our natural state when we exist and we get to create is polarity. But what she then chose to create, so there would still be a confusion, was separation of duality. And duality, as we always know, it's not the same as polarity. I've seen it in spiritual circles being used in the same term. It's not the truth. Polarity is a natural expression, and it's a divine law. And that's that first twin law through which the purest form of beings at the illumined level of Christ get to create and birth life into motion, right? So what she did is she created the distortion, which kept souls in constant limbo and spinning around this wheel that on Earth we get to know as the Karmic Wheel. And this Karmic Wheel is very lucrative in a way, you know, for many, because they believe, well, we're going to have all these lifetimes and I'm going to be this and that, and that's shown to people. But in truth, what's happening when you get to see beyond the veil, like I do, and what Spirit shows me, is that in most cases, souls get to have a very repetitive same lifetime over and over again. And they're not clearly being shown there that because of their unawake state, that she, as the greatest hoaxer, and in that matter and degree that she's the greatest magician in that sense, that she can create and perform any kind of mirage that confuses the souls, having a perception that that's their own dream and their own creative experience, and it's not. And it takes a very awake, illumined being to know that, and to, through that illumined counsel that, you know, I just have that inner communion with all the time, can have that understanding. So what Spirit has shown me recently is, because I had this burning question, like, why am I still on the planet? I felt like I completed this mission. And it came through a feeling that God showed me. And God said there's not many beings who would be able to uphold such a high level of understanding creation while having their earth body. On earth, you don't get to have such a profound understanding most of the time. You might channel it, people might channel. It's not the same. This is you actually having this within yourself. And God calls this when you engulf this and you digest it. So it's like each time Lucifera has been creating something of a distortion, Aurea through me has been digesting that, and in that way bringing her back to the self as well. So each time something has happened, I always tell her, I say, you know what? You're my sister and I love you and I'm never going to hate you. I'm angry at you, I'm mad at you sometimes for what you're doing. Of course, that's normal. Especially the human, because the human just doesn't want to be tortured and, you know, victimized all this time so badly. But when you have that high understanding and God shows you the bigger plan, you understand that it is a part of a bigger sacrifice. And it's not that false sacrifice that we believe on earth to be, but it's a divine request, it's a divine service, and it belongs to the heart and mind of God. And because it's so painful to witness that rebellion within ourselves, let's say someone who's very avoidant and they don't want to hear all the nasty things that they still do and pursue, and even if they're very hidden, through their actions they come out. So when someone who is in a more awake state, they would expose these actions to them and they would say, look what you're doing here. You know, and they don't want to see. They just always run. They always stay avoidant. This person has actually a lot of trauma and pain of that fall still stored in their painful, emotional, mental, physical bodies. A lot of us have been healing mental, like astral, mental, emotional bodies, and we're just maybe healing the physical body now, or it really depends on the journey you've chosen. But going back to relationships, right? So from the greater creation perspective, what we're doing is we're digesting these fragments that Lucifer has created as her own offspring. And the only way of healing this is internalizing them as our own. That's why we can't bypass our human experiences. The experience, remember, is the only thing that heals. A person who just goes to a 9-to-5 job every day, have the same relationship, static and routine every day. They're just having a relationship to not be alone, to just stay in the status quo. That person has not even begun that journey yet. They might be an outside observer. They have a little bit of the perspective. They might understand a little here and there. But once you step on that path, it's going to be one heck of a ride. But remember, it is God through us that has the greatest power, because the more we surrender, the more God can act through us. And this is what I call a person of faith versus a spiritualized person. A spiritualized person is a dreamer, is a person who has maybe higher ideals than people who just live a physical life, and it's one maybe station away from becoming a person of faith. I used to be at the beginning levels of my journey a spiritualized person. I no longer see myself as such. I don't follow any particular spiritual pursuit or anything. I don't ascribe myself to be a spiritual person. I'm a person of faith, of Christ and God, of union, of knowing what illumination is, and staying constantly connected with this fountain of this offspring of love that's constantly flowing and recharging itself through me. This is a natural state of union, which we've talked about, and in my case, my core creation name is Aurea Aureon. And when this name is given to the self, it is remembered, it has to be reinstigated, it has to be constantly reinvoked, has to be brought through full understanding of what that I am presence is for you, not just globally and universally, but individually. And when you do, you get to experience yourself, not just accept yourself, know yourself, feel yourself, experience yourself. This is healing the human self. And the first step of healing that human design, the human inner child, is what then leads to our inner maturity, becoming a matured person. That's where integration of the child and the spirit takes place. Only then, right, the true spiritualization of life force begins. This is a conception of what it means to be spiritual, and then embodying spirit. Totally two different things. Because you can have on and off spiritual pursuits throughout your life will not mean you've radically became this just pure exudance of who you are, pure self, nothing but pure self. This is how spirit enters us. And that's why years ago they told me, the Illumined beings have told me, the human has the key. Human is the key to unlocking the door of this healing, of separation, return back home. And so for me, when I do that healing completely and fully, and we're now in that stage of healing another level of these healing patterns, and I know people who get to say, well, I've healed all of it. Let me tell you, when you believe you've healed it all, you haven't usually even just begun. Because when you're healing, you're always aware that there's more. And it's not going to be you who say, well, I have done it. It's going to be an embodiment, what you embody, that will demonstrate this to you. And you will be one day like, oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, I came into this. It's not going to come from your mind and how you assess yourself. It's going to be simple an experience of pure knowing, and your life will be altered. So look at your life. Look at the conditions and circumstances in your life and tell me honestly, if you're still living in lack and fear and you're still plugged into the matrix and serving the big brother, you know, the giant, toiling, sweating to just survive and to have money and support and all these things, and your relationship that feels stagnant and nothing ever changes, and your life is basically like this, every day the same in different shapes and forms, you're literally not embodying and experiencing yourself, your soul. The soul is longing. The soul is somewhere there longing to have that and be moved through you. But the spirit is something that works through wisdom of, as I've already expressed, this sharing and inter-exchange. Spirit creates a movement, the human does, opening within the soil of earth. The spirit, more spirit can come in. Then you do the inner blossoming within the human, more spirit comes in. And then again, it's like this. And in most cases, people who have still a tremendous level of either they're very nonchalant, you will see the tendencies to avoid, they're not even going to be able to have a conversation with someone that does not end up firing them up and shooting in flames and being triggered all the time. And instead of that, they choose relationships of the status quo that never challenge them. These are the people that haven't even begun walking this physically. They might have that first few epiphanies, and still, they haven't been laying the foundation yet. And it probably won't be their lifetime for this union to climax and come into full fruition. But for those of you who first and foremost understand what I'm talking about, you're feeling it, you're observing these things in your own life, you're seeing that you're no longer resisting to what is, and you're just not even questioning, well, how much more of this? How much more do I have? You know, you're just trusting God. You have such pure faith that whatever it is, it's how it's supposed to be. And we're all stubborn sometimes, but when you're really in the Christ, when you know yourself absolutely to be the Christ, you will have zero resistance to life anymore. And that's not just that which you think it's a lie and which is pleasant. No, my dears. Because I know people who, you know, when it's a beautiful, easy conversation, oh, they're very quick to jump in. And then you would say something, ooh, that's too me confronting, being confronted with something. No thanks, bye. See, those are triggers. It's how the darkness operates, because this fear instilled within us rejects the light. It always rejects it and deflects it. And that kind of person has to have their own epiphany. No amount of whatever kind of work with them and telling them or convincing them will ever work in that matter, because they have to meet the God presence within their own self. They have to meet themselves as the Christ, not just have a belief in this universal being as the Christ is, but meet the inner Christ. And this is what the focus of my videos, unintentionally, but also intentionally, has been in the last few months, right? And we've been diving deeper each time, as I've also been noticing a deeper coming into union within myself. And sometimes these cycles are longer, sometimes shorter. The one with the physical transgression for me has been lasting around 2 years, and I'll finally, I feel like it's almost like the last level of this union of coming really back home for me. And only when I get to embody Aurea fully, which is doing the child healing that will be fully transparent, which will allow for the Aurea's presence to come in uninterruptedly, only then I get to experience ascension and ascend eventually. And so there's so many different layers and stages. And as you know, when you're going through this in relationships, because they're a good mirror for us, because in the reflection of the other, we get to see faster what's still lacking within the self. And it's not fully embraced and healed yet. But you can't make that your person, because you don't know where they are in their journey unless somehow you both see it in your eyes and in your actions that you are on the same page. You're on the similar frequency band with maybe a little bit of differences, but unanimously there is a similarity of where you have come in your journey, and you can now walk together. This is what this is kind of more in alignment with than waiting for someone as that person to have or be in that experience with, because people are at different levels and you can't expect someone to forcefully jump into something. You can't force someone to be where they're not yet. They have to come into this healing on their own first. They have to accept it, that this is the truth. They have to wake up to it. Then they have to start accepting life. And by meeting their inner child and addressing that through sometimes what appears to be painful memories of nostalgia, like, oh, recently when I had that experience, I had to wake up to moments that have been created through a more childlike version of me. And I had to go back and do that cycling and recycling, but this time I brought it forth in including those elements of what already was and always is, and making it a more mature version, right? And this is how this healing happens. Sometimes we embed the energy of ourselves into the other for a reason, because we need that reflection. So for me, the beloved is on earth, everyone I would come into more intimate a relationship with, even if it's just for a moment, or it's maybe lasting a few months or a year, or there's something. And in that moment, I have to, with all my heart, feel and believe that is my beloved. That's my ultimate in this moment, because they are my ultimate mirror for all that's still wounded and not addressed, and what needs to come into maturity and fruition within me, so that the Empress within me can give and cultivate new birth again. And each time I do that and I accept that and I fully surrender, I'm given this message that I've swallowed and digested yet another aspect of that fragment that Lucifera has created. And by that, God has shown me that when I have so much love, God said, you already have so much love that you're actually not just doing this work as one being, because sometimes we have this question, but I can do much as just one being. Why am I then still here? Because I can't change the world. It's not about changing the world. It has never, ever been about changing the world. The world is an illusion. The world is a status quo. It's a part of the collective. It is what it is. You can't change the world. The world will always be what it is in relation to different energies. They're always being put in and out, and input, output. That's just always changing. So it's already changing in itself, so you're not here to change it, especially not through control. We are simply here on the journey of illumined union, of returning home, and without assessing it mentally and logically, thinking what it is and what's supposed to mean, simply embracing it and surrendering all the red flags and waving a white flag and saying, I give up. I really surrender any false notion and idea that I have about myself, this world, and the others. And I simply accept that whatever it is given to me and offer it through the sacredness of the Mother's heart brings me closer to that love and union within myself. And only within myself I could experience this illumined presence. And each time I go deeper into this ring of fire, I get to cultivate more of that abandonment, that fall, that lack of, the fall from grace, what's called many times. God has also given me something else, right? Like I said, God said that when you expand to a certain level of Christhood, you're not just one being. So you're not just one being against the world. God said that the more illumined light you cultivate within your embodiment, you're actually starting to function at the level of group level, the group illumined level, which means you're exuding more light than one being, the identity of one being. This is more advanced for now. I'm not going to go into that, maybe on Patreon one day. But in this case, it means that one being has digested so much darkness, and this is what Aurea has been doing through me, Polona. She's been digesting these hijacked dark aspects and bringing them back home through me, simply through the body. She's been using the body as the vessel And again, the earth is just the body of clay, a beautiful being that has her own evolutionary journey. But she's offering us the gift of coming into that union, like many other planets and planes of existence, which is also always happening in parallel. But here we are on Earth doing it in this cycle, in this density, in this particular way of coming home through these bodies. So as Aurea has been digesting the darkness through me, each time it feels like Lucifera is less resistant. And I even feel it in my life. There's less darkness, there's less torture than it was previously. Because I've done the work. I've done a lot of work. And this is what God has shown me. The reason why I'm still here for now is because God needs that amount of lighthouse. God needs that amount of illumined presence for the greater ultimate fulfillment. It has nothing to do with Earth, whether the earth ascends and how many humans ascend. This is a greater plan that God has shown me. And God has called this, within my own guidance, just recently, something very interesting. It was a sentence. It was almost like a quote. And I channeled it almost automatically because we had this beautiful day yesterday, so full of love. I just couldn't imagine. And, we were contemplating and having discussions about this, as we always do, because our conversations are very deep. And so what was shared was this. On Earth, here as a human, focusing on the small as the human, and yet doing big things as a spirit. And this is what most people have been forgetting for a very long time, how simple it is. So they're filling their lives with so much distraction and fuel of the lesser, of the trivial, and a lot of people are constantly being discombobulated and living in that state, filling up their life with notions that are really have nothing to do absolutely with this union, filling their lives with endless activities and, all that to basically prevent themselves from feeling what's underneath and all the pain and how themselves they've been transgressed, And it simply is what it is. But remember, those of you who are courageous enough to step on this path and do the work, who are not just the level of the first epiphany, but you're already many, many steps ahead, it does require a lot, and I know, and you might have moments when you feel very sad and alone in this, but let me remind you that you're not. This is a collective journey. But this collective is not the collective we know as the collective consciousness on Earth, because when you truly do wake up, you become the collective of illumined beings, and you know yourself as a greater mission. You remember your birth. You know that you began there, not here. And Earth becomes less of a distraction, but more of a steady ground for you to work. And it's a firm database through which and from which you can build your own station of life, your own powerful pillar, and become a powerful reinforcement of the magnetic and electric forces of life. And life will choose those vessels, those channels that have been purified enough to bring more of that union through. So those of you who maybe been complaining how much difficulty you've had in your life in transgression, know that it's because you can, and you've chosen to do so. Because from a greater spirit perspective, you're doing great work. Although as a human, sometimes you just feel you have to focus on the small and being anchored and grounded and enjoying the simple things in life. Sometimes you might feel guilty for doing just that, and you're not doing just that. Because everything you do with awareness is sending out ripples and waves. And for me, Lucifera is always on my mind. I can't help it. She's a part of my life. And the funny thing about this true illumined journey and purpose is you don't put anything outside of your heart. Everything you do, you're putting in your heart. That's what I call this, digesting it. And for me, I have to realize that all that she's doing, all that she's creating, and all this distortion and transgression lives within me. It's not outside of me. And it doesn't mean you're the one who's created that. You've done this and you've created this darkness. But because you have the heart of illumined union and presence, you get to heal it. So you take it as your own. And this is how true healers who are Christ healers, this is what we're doing. And Jesus Christ was doing the same in his own way. And many of us are continuing the legacy in what this cycle of creation and illumined union is bringing forth, and what we're learning from it at this specific time, and what illumined beings are learning from the overall experience, because everyone is still learning. Don't forget that. We're all going with the flow. Only God is purity of source, knows it all. And perhaps there's elements that we wish we had more understanding of. And here's what I also want to put a little of the tiny advice. We all find ourselves in our human minds, mind-boggling at times. We want to ask more questions. God, tell me what about this? How do I know more about this? How do I know this is really happening? How do I know what this person is feeling? How do I know what this person is feeling about me? How do I know what I'm really feeling for them? All these questions. And God has recently told me, instead of having all these questions and they're like aiming darts and they're aimless, like they're aimlessly being shot out there, he said, instead of that, pray. Pray in an affirmative manner that the majestic nature of God is above it all, is beyond anything and everything. So for example, one question, well, will this relationship ever heal? What's my next step? What should I do? What should I do? And you're like constantly like doing like this and you can't figure it out. Pray. And an example of such a simple prayer would be, beloved God, I am. Beloved cosmic Christ, you who lives within me at all times. You are glorious. You are all of life and creation. I trust and I know with all the absolute faith within me that you know what to do. And through me, you will perform miracles. And this relationship, if it is my intention, and it absolutely is, will be fully healed in its due time. I trust in you, the maker of all life, the creator of all life, that you know how to heal this relationship, that you know how to heal the inner child within me and my wounds. And not just my relationship with my human child, but the relationship I have with the other. The relationship I have with Lucifera, the relationship I have with all of creation. And I know that only you, within me, you grow my understanding, making me more of an illumined human every single day. And that it is, and so it is. I trust in you with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my spirit. I am you, you are me. And in the threefold flame of love, wisdom, and power, with all the love and grace. Thank you. Amen. And a powerful gust of wind came as we did this powerful prayer. Spirit in action. That's what the prayer is. It's spirit in action. It's movement. I will have another Illumined Union reading for the next month in April. Each month we do one on Patreon. This month we have two. And it's just beautiful. Also, the story that comes through these oracles and stressing out these things. It's more about the direct interplays between the masculine and feminine and how this is being played out at the more relationship level and the dynamic that we're feeling as these poles between our masculine and feminine selves. So these are always beautiful, interesting readings. If you ever want to join, that's out there. Don't forget, I have a Telegram channel called Ascension Pioneers. All the links are down below. If you ever wish to support my journey and these videos, also links are down below. Thank you for those of you who already do or did, anytime, anywhere. Thank you for watching. As always, with so much love, wisdom, power, and healing. Here's to return back home. From my heart to yours. Bye for now.